So, what is American Christianity? It may seem like a strange question, but the fact is, a lot of us in this thing about coping with change are actually wrestling with how the faith as we come to know it, how as we received it, how it is to function in an era in which everything is so different than how it was when that expression of faith developed. Let me tell you what I mean by this. When Christianity came to North America, it encountered a situation that it had not encountered very much before. The only other analogy I have is when St. Patrick took Christianity to Ireland. But the distances of America were so great, and the people who were nominally Christian often didn't even have a church to go to. They were just scattered across now this wilderness, except for the major cities that were on the eastern coast. And one of the great insights of genius that Bishop Asbury of the Methodist Church had was, we won't be able to have ordained clergy for all these people. So what we're going to do is we're going to let the ordained clergy roam around, called them circuit riders. And then in each locale, then there can be lay people that we recognize to be godly folks, and we will train them, and they can keep things going in between when the ordained clergy is not around. Over time, this developed a whole different kind of expression of Christianity than had existed before. So the way that American Christianity developed and the character it took on has three main elements. The first is rural. American Christianity was rural. There was a suspicion of urban things, including urban Christianity, all the way from the beginning, because vast majority of Americans lived in rural situations or very small towns. And then it was revivalistic, meaning that rather than focus on the ongoing practices of the faith of the day-to-day kind of formation that had been the norm before, American Christianity took on this vibe of that there periodically needed to be these movements of spiritual awakening that would sweep through a place and catch people up into a great fervor of faith. And after many generations, then this became the norm. And if one was not experiencing this every few years, then something was askew with the faith. It was lukewarm and had lost its punch. And then American Christianity was restorationist, meaning that it was largely uninterested in all the centuries that were between the New Testament era and the times in which people were living. There was an idea that it was possible to ignore all that it had been accumulated over those times and to return to the way that they imagined that early Christians practiced and thought about their faith. So there was very little understanding at the time about how cultures shift and shape people. It was just a kind of a naive thought that one could look into the Bible, see what was there, reproduce it in your own time, and that was exactly conforming to the way that early Christians had practiced their faith. So it was rural, it was revivalistic, and it was restorationist. So now with this kind of heritage, and that's my heritage, and it's a heritage that many of you share, this is a kind of a faith that's ahistorical. When you put a in front of something, of course, it means that it negates it. This is not a historical faith. It is a faith that almost leapfrogs over 2,000 years from the pages of the New Testament into buzzard roost wherever you live, and it's our great grandparents were very sincere in all of this, and it was a living faith and it was a beautiful faith, and we inherited it, and we appreciate it, and we have a fondness for the things that they created in it, like their gospel singing and so forth. But what are we to do now that we are thrust into a world to where most of us are not living in a rural context? The revivalistic context is difficult to obtain because we do not live with long stretches of time without going to church, and then we go for a week to a camp meeting kind of thing where there's a very intense focus on this. And it's difficult to be restorationist in the same way when we have access to the internet to understand all the cultural changes that Christianity has gone through time, and also in the various nations that it has landed. In fact, we're surrounded by neighbors who claim to be Christian but may flesh this out in very different ways, and we're left with either arguing with them all the time or realizing that this common faith takes on many different expressions depending on its time and place. So here we are in a postmodern, largely secular world that's becoming increasingly secular, and we're asking about what do we do with Christianity as we've inherited it, and this creates enormous conflict in our churches, because great numbers of people in our churches, and I've pastored 2 large churches in America, and I have faced this always, very sincere people believe that you're trying to change the faith once and for all delivered to the saints, when actually you're trying to equip Christianity and the church for living in an era that particular expression of Christianity is ill-equipped to address. So my argument has been that we've got to go back and recover the historical elements of our faith, that our great-grandparents and for many centuries back, particularly in the Protestant world, and very particularly in the evangelical world that also kind of dismisses a lot of the Protestant tradition, we've got to recover this whole package of thought and practice as we look at living in a very changed context than the one that our great-grandparents lived in. And to do that, we have to recognize the unique characteristics of American Christianity, appreciate them. Some of them have been a blessing to the church throughout the world, but we also have to recognize that many of these things that we are fond of and culturally connected to are not really the faith once and all delivered to the saints. They're not bad. There's nothing wrong with them. It's just the way we have done things in our country and with its unique history. And when we recognize that, then we can move on to saying, how do we now deal with a global context, a postmodern context, a secular context, a technologically sophisticated context, and we will find that the faith as it's developed in Catholic, Orthodox, and Protestant venues over the centuries give us a rich heritage from which to draw to address these things, because many of the questions that we now deal with have been already dealt with. We just didn't know about that heritage because we were caught up in a beautiful and wonderful expression of our own, whose context now is kind of giving us difficulty in knowing how it shifts to meet the challenges of a very different time.